AITA for telling my sister I hope her husband cheats on her after she ruined my wedding dress? Weddings are supposed to be one of the happiest times in your life. At least, that's what everyone tells you. For the past year, I've been living in a whirlwind of cake tastings, flower arrangements, and seating charts, all leading up to one perfect day, my wedding. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that nothing about planning a wedding is simple, especially when your family is involved. I'm 29 years old, and after 5 years with my fiancé. We're finally getting married in 3 months. I'm excited, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't also overwhelmed. There's something about planning a wedding that brings out the best and the worst in people. And in my case, it's brought out a side of my sister I never saw coming. My fiancé and I have a good life together. We met through mutual friends, started dating casually, and it grew into something more serious over the years. He proposed last summer, on a quiet evening at home, nothing extravagant. Just the two of us. It was perfect. I wasn't one for grand gestures. And neither was he. Our relationship has always been about the little things. The small moments that make up a life together. And that's how I thought our wedding would be. Just a celebration of our love with the people who matter most to us. But if there's one thing that became a big deal during this whole process, it was my wedding dress. I didn't expect to care as much as I did about the dress. I mean, I knew it was important, but I didn't realize how much it would come to symbolize everything I wanted my wedding to be. I spent months looking for the perfect one. I must have tried on at least 50 dresses, each one beautiful in its own way, but none of them felt quite right. And then, one day, I found it. It was a custom-made gown, tailored just for me. I won't lie, it was expensive. More than I probably should have spent. But the moment I put it on, I knew it was the one. It was elegant, timeless, with just the right amount of detail. I could picture myself walking down the aisle, all eyes on me, and feeling like a bride. The dress wasn't just fabric and lace. It was a symbol of everything this day meant to me. The culmination of years of love, commitment, and planning. Given how much it meant to me, I was careful with it. I didn't want to take any risks, especially not with my dog at home who sheds everywhere. So, I decided to keep it at my mom's house, where it would be safe from any potential accidents. That decision seemed like the most logical one at the time. And then, there's my sister. My sister, Jenny, is 5 years older than me, and we've always had a complicated relationship. Growing up, we weren't particularly close, but we didn't fight either. She was always the strong-willed one, the type of person who did whatever she wanted without caring much about how it affected others. She's been like that as long as I can remember, stubborn, opinionated, and never afraid to tell you exactly what she thinks, even if you don't ask for her input. Recently, she's gone through what she calls a life-changing epiphany. It all started about 6 months ago when she announced that she was done with consumer culture and wanted to live a more eco-conscious, sustainable lifestyle. At first, I admired her commitment. It's not easy to overhaul your life like that. And I thought it was great that she wanted to make changes that would have a positive impact on the environment. But over time, her new lifestyle became more than just a personal choice. It became her whole identity. Every conversation we had somehow turned into a lecture on how fast fashion is destroying the planet or how we're all contributing to the degradation of the earth because we buy new clothes instead of thrifting. I couldn't have a simple coffee with her without her criticizing my takeout cup or asking why I didn't bring a reusable one. It wasn't just the lecturing, though. She had also thrown herself into DIY projects with an intensity I hadn't seen before. From repurposing old furniture to making her own clothes, Jenny was determined to live off the grid as much as possible. Some of her projects turned out okay, but most of them, if I'm being honest, looked like Pinterest fails. I kept my opinions to myself, not wanting to cause tension. After all, it wasn't hurting anyone, or so I thought. Despite her increasingly judgmental behavior, I tried to keep the peace. I figured she was just going through a phase and would eventually mellow out. And besides, I had my own life to focus on, namely, my wedding. But looking back, I should have seen the warning signs, the subtle hints, the little comments she made about how over the top weddings are and how I should be focused on something meaningful rather than material things. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it's not like she was directly involved in the planning process. She wasn't a bridesmaid, and I didn't ask her for advice on anything wedding related, mostly to avoid any unsolicited opinions. I thought by keeping her at arm's length, I'd be able to avoid any conflict. I was wrong. In the weeks leading up to what I now call the dress disaster, I noticed Jenny becoming more vocal about her new beliefs. Every time we had family dinners, she'd go on about how weddings were consumerist traps, designed to make people spend money on things they don't need. I rolled my eyes and let it slide, not wanting to get into an argument. But then she started making comments about my wedding specifically. You know, you really don't need all of this, she'd say. Why not just have a simple ceremony in nature? It would be more meaningful and way less wasteful. I tried to brush it off, explaining that this was how I wanted to celebrate my marriage. But her criticisms didn't stop there. She started poking fun at the idea of a traditional white wedding dress, calling it boring and outdated. You could do something more creative, she said at one point. Something unique. That really stands out. I smiled politely and ignored her. The dress was perfect as it was, and I wasn't about to change it. But Jenny wasn't done. Her latest DIY projects had gotten more extreme, and I could tell she was looking for ways to push her eco-conscious agenda onto anyone who would listen. At one point, she made my mom a tote bag out of old t-shirts, which my mom accepted with an awkward smile. Even though it was barely functional, Jenny seemed so proud of her creation. And I think that's when I realized just how far gone she was with this new lifestyle. It wasn't until later that I understood just how far she was willing to take it. The weekend before everything fell apart, I was at my mom's house for dinner. After the meal, I excused myself and decided to check on my wedding dress, which I hadn't seen in a couple of weeks. I wasn't worried, just excited to look at it again and imagine walking down the aisle in 3 months. As I unzipped the garment bag, I felt my heart race with anticipation. I pulled back the protective cover, ready to see the gown that represented the biggest day of my life. But what I saw wasn't the dress I had picked out. It wasn't the elegant, simple gown that I had spent months searching for. Instead, my wedding dress had been turned into a tie-dyed, rainbow-colored mess. The bottom half, which had once been a delicate, pure white, was now a swirl of garish colors: pink, blue, yellow, green. It looked like something you'd wear to a music festival, not a wedding. I stood there, frozen, my brain struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. Maybe this wasn't my dress? Maybe my mom had accidentally switched it with something else? But no, this was my dress. I could tell by the intricate lacework at the top. The fabric I had fallen in love with the moment I tried it on. The only thing that had changed was the bottom half, the half that had been ruined. My heart sank, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had to sit down, my legs trembling. How could this have happened? Who could have done this? Then it hit me. Jenny. I could hear her voice in my head. You could do something more creative. Something unique. That really stands out. Suddenly, all the little comments, the subtle criticisms, the suggestions, it all made sense. She had done this. She had taken it upon herself to fix my wedding dress, to turn it into something that fit her vision of what a dress should be. I could feel the rage building inside me, hotter and stronger than anything I had ever felt before. I wasn't just angry, I was devastated, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. I sat there, staring at my wedding dress, now a ruined mess of tie-dye colors. As the realization settled in, my sister had done this. The one thing I had been so careful about, the one thing I wanted to keep perfect, was now destroyed because of her selfishness. Her need to impose her eco-conscious lifestyle on everyone around her. The emotions hit me all at once: shock, disbelief, sadness, and then pure, unfiltered rage. I could feel my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, and my throat tightening as I fought back the tears. This was supposed to be my dream dress, the one thing I had splurged on for my wedding. And now it was ruined. Irreversibly. No amount of cleaning or tailoring could undo what she had done. I stood up, my legs wobbling beneath me, and zipped the garment bag back up, as if that would somehow make the disaster less real. I knew I couldn't leave it like this. I had to confront her. I had to know why she had done this. How she could possibly think this was okay. And more than anything, I wanted to see the look on her face when I told her just how badly she had screwed up. My mom was still in the kitchen, washing dishes, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I stormed past her, my head spinning with anger, and found Jenny in the living room, casually scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up when she saw me, a big smile on her face, like she was proud of herself. "Oh hey, I was wondering when you'd see it," she said, her voice annoyingly cheerful. I couldn't speak. For a second, I just stared at her, completely stunned by how casual she was being. Like what she had done wasn't a big deal at all. "Do you like it?" she asked, clearly expecting some kind of praise for her creativity. I thought the white was too boring, so I added a little color. "It's way more fun this way. Don't you think?" "Fun? Fun?" She thought ruining my wedding dress was fun? The anger I had been trying to keep at bay surged to the surface. And before I could stop myself, I exploded. "Are you out of your mind?" I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. "What the hell were you thinking? You ruined my dress." Jenny's smile faded slightly, but she still didn't seem to grasp the gravity of what she had done. "Ruined? No, I didn't ruin it. I made it better. It's unique now. You'll stand out. No one else will have a dress like this." I stared at her in disbelief, my brain barely able to process what I was hearing. She didn't get it. She didn't understand how much this dress meant to me. How long I had searched for it. How much I had spent to make sure it was perfect. And the worst part was that she didn't seem to care. "Better?" I spat, my voice thick with emotion. "You think you made it better? Jenny, I spent months finding that dress. Months. It's custom made. And you took it upon yourself to completely destroy it without asking me? How could you be so selfish?" Jenny rolled her eyes, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Oh, come on. It's just a dress. I was trying to help you. I thought you'd like it. It's more you than that plain white thing you picked out. Besides, you're making way too big of a deal out of this. It's just fabric." "Just fabric?" I echoed, feeling the sting of her words like a slap to the face. "This isn't about fabric, Jenny. This is about you not respecting me, my choices, or my wedding. You didn't ask me if I wanted this. You didn't even think about how I would feel. You just did what you wanted because, as always, you think you know better." I could feel the tears burning at the back of my eyes. But I refused to cry in front of her. I didn't want her to see just how much she had hurt me. How deeply she had cut me with her thoughtless actions. Jenny folded her arms and sighed dramatically, as if I was the one causing the problem. "I was just trying to do something nice for you. You didn't have to yell at me. Besides, it's not like the wedding's ruined because of a dress. You can always get another one." Her words were like a punch to the gut. She didn't get it. She didn't understand. And worse, she didn't care. She didn't care about how much effort I had put into planning this wedding. How much this day meant to me. All she cared about was forcing her own ideals onto me, even if it meant destroying something I loved. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down my cheeks as I stood there, trembling with rage and heartbreak. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You don't get to decide what's important to me. You don't get to make these choices for me. You ruined something that meant the world to me. And all you can say is that I'm overreacting?" She opened her mouth to say something else, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to listen to her excuses or her justifications. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me as I fled upstairs to my mom's bedroom. I needed to be alone. I needed to get away from her before I said something I'd regret even more than I already had. Once I was alone, the full weight of what had happened hit me, and I collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. This was supposed to be one of the happiest times in my life. My wedding was 3 months away, and instead of feeling excited, I was heartbroken. The dress that I had dreamed of wearing, the one that made me feel like a bride, was gone. And it wasn't just the dress that was ruined, it was the trust I had in my sister. As I lay there, crying into my mom's pillow. I couldn't stop replaying Jenny's words in my head. It's just a dress. You're making too big of a deal out of this. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was just a dress. Maybe I was overreacting. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. This wasn't just about the dress. It was about my sister's complete disregard for my feelings. Her inability to see past her own desires, to consider how her actions affected other people. It was about the fact that, in her eyes, my wedding wasn't about me, it was about her. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to keep yelling until she understood how much she had hurt me. But another part of me just wanted to cut her out of my life entirely. If she couldn't respect me or my choices, what was the point of keeping her around? Could I really forgive her for this? And even if I could, would she ever change? Or would she continue to impose her beliefs on me, pushing me further and further away until there was nothing left of our relationship? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that my heart felt shattered, and I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. The next few hours passed in a blur. My mom eventually came upstairs, knocking gently on the door before entering. She saw the state I was in. But before she could ask what was wrong, I broke down and told her everything. I expected her to be furious with Jenny, to take my side completely. But instead, she sighed and said, "Jenny was just trying to help. You didn't have to yell at her like that." I stared at her in disbelief. Was everyone around me blind? Couldn't they see that Jenny had crossed a line? That this wasn't just about a dress, but about respect? She ruined my wedding dress. "Mom," I shouted, my voice breaking. She had no right to do that. I'm not apologizing for yelling at her. Mom looked uncomfortable, like she didn't know what to say, and finally settled on, "You two need to talk this out. You can't let this ruin everything." But I didn't want to talk to Jenny. Not yet. Not while I was still so raw and angry. I needed time to process everything, to figure out how I was going to move forward, both with my wedding and with my relationship with my sister. The rest of that night, I stayed locked in my room, avoiding Jenny and my mom. I didn't want to see anyone. I just wanted to be alone with my thoughts, even though they were torturing me. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of loss wash over me. It wasn't just the dress I was mourning, it was the relationship I thought I had with my sister. I had always known we weren't that close, but I never thought she would do something like this. I never thought she could be so selfish, so blind to the impact of her actions. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could fix things, that I could forgive her, I wasn't sure if I could. The dress was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had barely slept. The events of the previous day hung over me like a dark cloud. And the first thing that came rushing back to my mind was the sight of my ruined wedding dress. It was as if the dress symbolized something much bigger, my trust in my sister, my ability to rely on my family for support, and the sense that my wedding was slipping out of my control. I stayed in bed for a while, hoping that if I just lay there, I wouldn't have to face the day. Or worse, face my sister. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I needed to confront the reality of what had happened, and I needed to figure out how to move forward. The anger from the night before hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had simmered overnight, leaving me even more furious and hurt. I finally dragged myself out of bed and headed downstairs, where I could already hear my mom and Jenny talking in the kitchen. As I walked down the hall, I caught snippets of their conversation, Jenny sounding exasperated and my mom's voice calm but slightly strained. It was clear they had been talking about me. "I just don't get why she's so upset," Jenny was saying as I walked into the room. "It's just a dress. I was trying to make it better for her." "Jenny," my mom said quietly, glancing over at me when I entered. "You have to understand, this was important to her." Jenny turned around, and her eyes met mine. For a moment, there was a flicker of something, maybe regret, but it was quickly replaced by her usual look of superiority. "Look, I'm sorry if you're upset," she said, her tone lacking any real sincerity. "But I really thought you'd like it. I mean, it's way more unique now. The white was so boring." That was it. I could feel the rage boiling up inside me again. Stronger this time, fueled by the fact that she was still completely missing the point. How could she stand there and act like she had done me a favor? How could she be so utterly oblivious to the hurt she had caused? You thought I'd like it? I spat, my voice trembling with anger. You thought ruining my wedding dress would somehow make me happy? Are you that clueless? Or do you just not care about anyone but yourself? Jenny's face twisted in annoyance. God, you're being so dramatic. It's not like I set it on fire. I just made it a little more fun. Fun? I repeated, my voice rising. This isn't about fun. Jenny, this is about you completely disregarding my feelings, my choices, and my wedding. You had no right to touch that dress. None. I could feel my body shaking as I spoke. My hands balled into fists at my sides. My heart was pounding, and I could barely breathe through the waves of anger crashing over me. I had never felt this level of fury before. Not even when I first discovered the dress. The more Jenny spoke, the more it became clear that she had no concept of the damage she had done. Not just to the dress, but to our relationship. Jenny rolled her eyes, which only made my blood boil more. You're acting like I killed someone. It's just a dress. For God's sake, you can get another one. I don't want another one. I shouted, my voice cracking. That dress was perfect. And you ruined it. You ruined it because you think your opinions are the only ones that matter. You don't get to decide what's important to me. And you definitely don't get to destroy something I worked so hard to find. My mom, who had been standing awkwardly to the side, stepped forward, raising her hands as if to calm the situation. Okay, let's all take a deep breath. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand? It felt like my entire wedding had spiraled out of control. And my mom thought this was just getting out of hand now? I turned to her, desperate for some kind of support. For her to acknowledge that Jenny was in the wrong. But all I got was that same placating tone she always used when Jenny and I fought as kids. Like we were just bickering over something trivial. She didn't mean to hurt you. Sweetie, my mom said gently. She was just trying to help. Maybe you both need to calm down and talk this through. Calm down? How could I calm down when no one seemed to understand the gravity of what had happened? I turned back to Jenny. My voice colder now. This isn't something we can just talk through. Jenny, you destroyed something that meant the world to me. And you're standing there acting like it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. You don't get to dictate what I care about. You don't get to rewrite my wedding just because you think it's too traditional. Jenny's eyes narrowed. You're so obsessed with this stupid dress. But maybe you should focus on what really matters. It's not about the dress. It's about the marriage, right? Who cares if your dress has a little color now? Honestly, you're acting like a spoiled brat. That was the final straw. I could feel the words forming on my tongue before I could stop them. Sharp and venomous. Words that I knew would cross a line, but I was too angry to hold back. I hope your husband cheats on you. I spat, my voice icy. Maybe then you'll know what it feels like to have something important to you completely destroyed. The room fell into a heavy silence. Jenny's face went pale, her mouth falling open in shock. For a brief second, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, like I had finally said something that would make her feel the pain she had caused me. But that satisfaction quickly gave way to guilt as I watched the hurt spread across her face. My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God. Name. That was uncalled for. But the words were out. And there was no taking them back. Jenny blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what I had just said. What the hell is wrong with you? She choked out, her voice thick with emotion. You really just said that? I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to apologize. But the larger part of me was still too angry to care. She had ruined something precious to me. Something I could never get back. And now, for the first time, she was the one feeling the sting of betrayal. I'm done with this, Jenny snapped, her voice shaking as she turned and stormed out of the kitchen. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving my mom and me standing in the thick, suffocating silence. My mom turned to me, her face a mix of shock and disappointment. I can't believe you said that, she whispered. You didn't have to take it that far. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Part of me knew my mom was right, that I had crossed a line. That my words were cruel and unnecessary. But another part of me still felt justified. I wanted Jenny to feel the pain she had caused me. I wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences. That she couldn't just walk all over me and expect me to stay silent. But now that the heat of the moment was over, I wasn't sure if I could stand by what I had said. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jenny didn't come back, and my mom spent most of the afternoon trying to talk me into apologizing to her. I could tell my mom was torn. On one hand, she understood why I was upset, but on the other, she thought I had gone too far with the cheating comment. I get it, sweetie, she said softly, sitting next to me on the couch later that evening. I know you're hurt, and I know Jenny overstepped. But saying something like that, it's not going to make things better. You need to think about whether you really meant it. Did I mean it? The truth was, I wasn't sure. In that moment, it had felt like the only way to get through to her. The only way to make her understand how deeply she had hurt me. But now, with the adrenaline wearing off, I could feel the weight of what I had said pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the dress anymore. It was about our relationship. And I wasn't sure if we could come back from this. Still, I wasn't ready to apologize. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let go of the anger. The hurt. I felt like if I apologized, it would mean that Jenny's actions were excusable. That what she had done was somehow less damaging because I had reacted badly. And I couldn't let her get away with that. Not this time. But deep down, I knew this wasn't sustainable. I couldn't keep holding on to this level of rage. Not if I wanted to move forward with my wedding and my life. I needed to figure out how to process everything that had happened. How to make peace with it, not just for Jenny's sake, but for mine. The next few days were difficult. Jenny didn't call or text. And I avoided going to my mom's house, not wanting to risk running into her. I needed space, time to think about what I wanted to do. I spent hours replaying the confrontation in my head, dissecting every word, every action, trying to make sense of how things had escalated so quickly. I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, we'd have to talk. But what would I say? How could I express the depth of my anger and hurt without making things worse? And more importantly, how could I forgive her for what she had done? The dress was ruined. There was no undoing that. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to salvage the relationship, if I could find it in myself to forgive her. And if she could finally take responsibility for her actions. It wasn't going to be easy. But nothing about this situation was. For now, all I could do was wait and hope that, somehow, we could find a way through this mess. After the explosion with my sister, the days that followed felt like I was walking through a fog. The adrenaline from the argument had faded, and now I was left with the fallout, an ugly mess of guilt, anger, and uncertainty. The dress was still ruined. Jenny was still avoiding me, and my wedding was still fast approaching. But the thing that stuck with me the most was what I had said to her. The words that had cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had before. I hope your husband cheats on you. Every time I replayed the scene in my head, that sentence echoed back at me like a bad joke. I hadn't just crossed a line, I had obliterated it. And now, sitting in the silence of my own thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder how I had let myself say something so cruel. I wasn't that kind of person. At least, I didn't think I was. But in that moment, I had wanted to hurt her as much as she had hurt me. I wanted her to feel the same sense of betrayal and loss that I was feeling over the dress. But was that really fair? Did she deserve it? I wrestled with that question over and over in my mind. On the one hand, she had completely disregarded my feelings, my wedding, and everything that mattered to me. She had taken something precious, something I had spent months planning and working for, and turned it into a joke, a reflection of her own self-righteousness and eco-conscious agenda. I was right to be angry. I was right to feel betrayed. But on the other hand, what I had said wasn't just about the dress. It was about revenge. It was about wanting her to suffer the way I had. And that was where the guilt started to creep in. Because no matter how much she had hurt me, wishing infidelity on someone, especially my own sister, wasn't something I could easily justify. It wasn't something I could defend. Not to myself and certainly not to anyone else. In the days that followed, my mom continued to push me to apologize. Every time we talked on the phone, she brought it up, gently but persistently. "You need to make things right with Jenny," she would say, her voice soft but firm. "I know you're upset, but you went too far with that comment. You'll regret it if you don't make amends." At first, I resisted. I wasn't ready to apologize. Not while I was still drowning in the anger and the hurt. I felt like apologizing would mean letting Jenny off the hook for what she had done. It would mean minimizing the impact of her actions. And I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. But as the days stretched into a week, and then two, the silence between us grew heavier. My wedding was getting closer. And instead of feeling excitement, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. The dress had been ruined. Yes. But it was more than that. The tension with my sister was hanging over me like a dark cloud. And I knew that if I didn't deal with it, it would cast a shadow over the entire wedding. My fiancé, who had been my rock through all of this, finally sat me down one evening. He had been supportive, of course, agreeing that Jenny had crossed a line. But I could tell that he was growing tired of the drama. "You don't have to forgive her," he said gently, "but maybe it's time to think about what you want moving forward. Holding on to all this anger, especially with your wedding coming up, isn't going to help. Do you really want this to be the thing that defines your relationship with your sister?" I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I spent the rest of that night thinking about what he had said. Did I really want this to be the defining moment of our relationship? Did I want to look back on my wedding and remember it as the time when everything fell apart with my sister? It was a tough question to answer. A part of me still felt justified in my anger. After all, she had ruined my wedding dress. A symbol of everything I had worked so hard for. But another part of me knew that this fight was bigger than the dress. It was about years of built-up tension. About unspoken resentments that had finally come to a head. Jenny and I had never been close. We were sisters, yes, but our relationship had always been strained. Growing up, we were like oil and water, constantly at odds. Always competing for our parents' attention. Always trying to one-up each other. And even as adults, that dynamic hadn't really changed. Jenny had always been the dominant one. The one who felt entitled to impose her opinions on everyone else. And I had always been the one who quietly seethed, bottling up my frustrations until they exploded. This fight over the dress wasn't just about the dress. It was about all the times Jenny had pushed me aside. All the times she had made me feel small. All the times she had inserted herself into my life without any regard for my feelings. This was about the years of unresolved tension that had finally boiled over in the worst possible way. But did that excuse what I had said? As the days passed, I started to feel the weight of my own words more and more. The guilt gnawed at me, even as I tried to convince myself that I was justified. Because deep down, I knew that wishing for someone's marriage to fall apart, wishing for someone to experience the kind of betrayal I had felt, wasn't who I wanted to be. So, after nearly 2 weeks of avoiding the situation, I finally decided that I needed to do something. I wasn't ready to forgive her. And I wasn't ready to forget what she had done. But I also knew that I couldn't keep carrying this anger around. It was exhausting, and it was preventing me from moving forward with my wedding plans. I needed to let go. Not for her sake, but for mine. I thought about how to approach it. I wasn't ready to have a face-to-face conversation with her yet. I didn't trust myself to stay calm. And I didn't want another argument. But I also knew that I couldn't keep avoiding her. So, I decided to write her a letter. It felt like the best way to express what I was feeling without the risk of things spiraling out of control. I sat down one evening with a cup of tea and my laptop. And I started typing. At first, the words didn't come easily. I wasn't sure how to begin. How to strike the right balance between expressing my anger and acknowledging my own wrongdoing. But once I started, the words flowed out of me like a flood. I didn't hold back. I told her exactly how I felt about the dress. About the disrespect. About how she had crossed a line by imposing her beliefs on me. I told her that she had hurt me more than she realized. And that the dress wasn't just fabric to me, it was a symbol of something much bigger. But I also took responsibility for my part in the argument. I admitted that my comment about her husband had been cruel and unnecessary. I told her that I had said it in the heat of the moment. That I had wanted to hurt her because I was hurt. But that I knew it was wrong. I didn't apologize for being angry, I had every right to be. But I did apologize for lashing out in such a personal way. When I finished the letter, I read it over and felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't sure if it would fix anything. But at least I had said what I needed to say. I had taken the first step toward healing. Even if I wasn't sure what would come next. The next morning, I printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and dropped it off at my mom's house. I wasn't ready to face Jenny yet. But I figured she would get the letter soon enough. And then, all I could do was wait. In the days that followed, I focused on moving forward with my wedding plans. The dress was still a sore spot. But I had started looking for a replacement. It wasn't the same, and it never would be. But I knew that I couldn't let that one ruined dress define my entire wedding experience. I had to find a way to let go. To focus on what really mattered, marrying the person I loved. And slowly, as the days passed, I began to feel lighter. The anger that had weighed me down for so long started to lift. Little by little, I wasn't sure if Jenny and I would ever be close again. But at least I had taken the first step toward healing. Whether or not she responded to my letter didn't matter as much as the fact that I had expressed myself honestly and had taken responsibility for my part in the fight. It was a long process. And I knew there were still unresolved feelings between us. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like I could focus on my wedding without the dark cloud of our argument hanging over me. And that, more than anything, felt like a victory. In the days following my decision to write Jenny the letter, I thought I'd feel lighter. Like some of the weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And to some extent, it had. But even after taking that step, something still lingered, gnawing at me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. It was more than just the ruined dress. It was the deeper realization that what Jenny had done symbolized something far more significant. The breakdown of trust between us and the unraveling of a relationship that had always been fraught with tension. I had spent so much time focusing on the dress itself, the physical representation of what was supposed to be the most important day of my life, but it wasn't just about the fabric, the lace, or the intricate beading that was now splattered with tie-dye. The dress, in many ways, had come to represent my hopes, my excitement, and everything I had envisioned for my wedding. And when Jenny destroyed it, she hadn't just ruined a piece of clothing, she had trampled on something much more personal. Something intangible but deeply important to me. It was trust. I had trusted her enough to keep the dress at my mom's house. The place I believed would be the safest. I had never imagined she would cross such a line. That she would impose her views on my wedding so carelessly. Looking back, I realized that I had given Jenny the benefit of the doubt for years. I had always told myself that despite her often abrasive personality, she meant well, that deep down, she cared about me. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to see how one-sided our relationship had been. Jenny had always been the dominant one in our sibling dynamic. Growing up, she made the decisions, set the rules, and expected everyone, especially me, to follow her lead. As a younger sister, I had always felt like I was playing catch-up, trying to keep the peace while simultaneously resenting her for constantly making me feel inferior. It was a balancing act one had perfected over the years, keeping my true feelings buried, while outwardly maintaining a facade of indifference or quiet acceptance. But the wedding had changed everything. It was supposed to be my moment, my time to shine, and I had naively thought that Jenny would respect that. I had hoped that, for once, she would take a step back and let me have the spotlight. Instead, she had taken something deeply personal to me, my wedding dress, and twisted it into her own version of what she thought was better. In doing so, she had exposed the cracks in our relationship. Cracks that had always been there but that I had refused to acknowledge. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about years of feeling overshadowed, of feeling like I had to minimize myself to make space for her. And now, as I stared at the ruins of the dress that had once symbolized everything I had dreamed of, I realized that the damage went far beyond fabric and dye. It was a rupture in our relationship that I wasn't sure could be repaired. But how could I explain that to anyone else? How could I make them understand that the dress wasn't just a dress, it was a representation of my voice? my autonomy, and everything I had worked toward in planning my wedding? To my mom, to anyone else, it probably seemed like I was overreacting, like I was too attached to material things. But the dress was never just a material thing. It was a reflection of the care, love, and thought I had poured into creating my wedding day. And Jenny had taken that away from me without a second thought. I tried to talk to my mom about it again, hoping she would finally understand the depth of my hurt. But every time I brought it up, she seemed to downplay the significance of what had happened. "Sweetie," she said softly one afternoon over the phone, "I know the dress meant a lot to you. But it's just one part of the wedding. The most important thing is that you're marrying the person you love. You can get another dress." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "It's not just about the dress, Mom. It's about what the dress represents. It's about Jenny not respecting my choices. She made it about her. And now everything feels tainted." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I understand you're hurt," my mom finally said, her tone gentle but firm. "But holding on to this anger isn't going to help you. You have to find a way to let it go, or it's going to ruin your wedding." I knew she meant well, but her words only made me feel more isolated. How could I just let it go when every time I thought about the dress, I was reminded of the larger issue, Jenny's complete disregard for my feelings and the deep cracks in our relationship that had been laid bare? In the weeks that followed, I tried to move forward with my wedding plans. I found a new dress, not custom-made like the first, but beautiful nonetheless. I should have felt relieved to have that box checked off my list. But instead, I felt a strange emptiness. Every time I looked at the new dress, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a replacement, a poor substitute for what had been lost. It didn't carry the same meaning, the same sense of excitement and anticipation that the original dress had. It felt like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Meanwhile, I still hadn't heard from Jenny. She hadn't responded to my letter, and I hadn't made any attempts to reach out either. Part of me was relieved by the silence. It gave me time to process everything without the pressure of having to face her. But another part of me felt the weight of the unresolved conflict hanging over me. I knew we couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Eventually, we'd have to talk. But what would I even say? How could I explain the depth of my hurt without turning it into another argument? As the days passed, I started to reflect more on our relationship as a whole, beyond just the incident with the dress. I thought about all the times I had quietly accepted Jenny's behavior. All the times I had let her opinions and judgments go unchecked because I didn't want to cause a fight. I thought about the family dinners where she dominated the conversation, steering it toward her latest obsessions or projects, while I sat silently, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Had I been enabling her all these years? Had I allowed her to take up so much space in my life that I no longer knew how to assert my own needs, my own boundaries? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the dress disaster was just the latest in a long line of incidents where Jenny had overstepped. And I had allowed it to happen. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't just about me tolerating her behavior, it was about something I couldn't overlook. She had crossed a line. And I knew that if I didn't address it now, if I didn't stand up for myself, our relationship would continue down the same path. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't keep minimizing my own needs to accommodate her. But that realization didn't make it any easier to figure out what to do next. Part of me still wanted an apology from her, a genuine acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused. But another part of me knew that I couldn't control her response. I couldn't force her to see things from my perspective. And I couldn't make her change overnight. So, what did I want? What would make me feel like I could move forward? I spent a lot of time thinking about that question. I knew I couldn't undo what had happened. And I knew that even if Jenny apologized, it wouldn't erase the damage. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point wasn't about fixing the past but about redefining the future of our relationship. I realized that what I wanted, what I needed, was to set boundaries. Real boundaries. Ones that would protect me from feeling like this again. From being walked over or disrespected. I couldn't change Jenny, but I could change how I responded to her. I could stand up for myself in ways I hadn't before. And that, more than anything, felt like the key to healing. With that in mind, I made a decision. I would talk to Jenny. But it wouldn't be about rehashing the argument or demanding an apology. It would be about setting those boundaries, about making it clear that from now on, things were going to be different between us. I wouldn't allow her to impose her will on my life. And I wouldn't tolerate her disregard for my feelings. If we were going to move forward as sisters, she needed to understand that I wasn't going to play the role I had always played. I wasn't going to be the quiet, accommodating little sister anymore. But before I could have that conversation, I had to prepare myself emotionally. I had to be ready for the possibility that she wouldn't take it well. That she might react defensively or dismissively. And I had to be okay with that. I couldn't control her response. But I could control my own actions and my own peace of mind. As I sat with these thoughts, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't over the hurt. And I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I was starting to see a way forward, a way to reclaim my voice, my boundaries, and my sense of self. The dress was ruined, but I didn't have to be. As I stood on the verge of confronting my sister, I realized that the hardest part of moving forward wasn't setting the boundaries. It was deciding whether I owed her an apology for what I had said. The guilt over my comment about her husband still weighed heavily on me, even as my anger over the dress continued to simmer beneath the surface. Could I really stand firm in my boundaries if I hadn't taken responsibility for my own words? It felt like I was caught between two conflicting emotions. On one hand, I was justified in my anger, in my hurt. Jenny had crossed a line, one that shattered something important to me, and no amount of apology would change the fact that she had ruined my wedding dress. But on the other hand, I couldn't ignore the fact that I had retaliated with something far more personal and cruel. I had said something that went beyond the scope of our argument. Something that hit at the core of her relationship. And that wasn't who I wanted to be. But did she deserve an apology? That question gnawed at me, keeping me up at night. Every time I tried to justify my actions, I came back to the same unsettling truth. I had been cruel. Even if I felt justified in the moment, I had wanted to hurt her. And in doing so, I had crossed my own line. The realization that I had stooped to a level one wasn't proud of didn't come easily. For days, I wrestled with the idea of apologizing. Part of me wanted to dig my heels in, to refuse to admit any wrongdoing because I felt like Jenny's actions were worse. But another part of me, the part that still cared about the person I wanted to be, knew that I couldn't move forward without addressing what I had said. Not for her, but for myself. It's strange how guilt can shape our decisions. How it can hang over us like a shadow, growing darker the longer we try to ignore it. I had thought that writing the letter would be enough to release some of that guilt. But the truth was, it wasn't. Not entirely. The letter had been a way to express my feelings about the dress, to address the hurt and betrayal I felt. But it hadn't dealt with the deeper issue, my own need for self-reflection. And that was where the real work had to begin. I started by thinking about why I had lashed out the way I did. The more I reflected on the fight, the more I realized that my comment about her husband hadn't come from nowhere. It had been born out of years of resentment. Years of feeling like I was always on the losing end of our relationship. Jenny had always been the one in control. The one who dictated how things were supposed to go. And I had always been the one who stayed quiet. Who let her opinions overshadow my own. And this time, with the dress, it had been the final straw. I had snapped. And in doing so, I had unleashed all of the frustration I had buried over the years. But just because those feelings were valid didn't mean my response was justified. I had hurt her, deeply, and no matter how justified I felt in my anger, that didn't change the fact that I had taken things too far. I had gone for the jugular, and now I had to face the consequences. So, after much internal debate, I decided to apologize. Not because I was willing to forgive her just yet, but because I needed to take responsibility for my own actions. If I wanted to heal, I couldn't let that moment of cruelty define me. I had to own up to what I had said and try to make things right. Even if that didn't mean reconciling with her immediately. One evening, after much mental preparation, I picked up the phone and called her. My heart pounded as the phone rang, and I half hoped she wouldn't answer. But after a few rings, she picked up. Hello? Her voice was tense, guarded. as if she wasn't sure what to expect. "Jenny, it's me," I said, my voice faltering for a moment. "Can we talk?" There was a pause, and I could almost feel her hesitation through the phone. But after a few seconds, she sighed. "Yeah, I guess we should." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was to come. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I said. And I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. What I said about your husband, it was wrong. I shouldn't have gone there. I was angry, but that doesn't excuse it. I'm really sorry, Jenny." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. I wasn't sure how she would react, whether she would accept the apology or if it would lead to another argument. But I had said what I needed to say, and that was all I could do. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't expect you to apologize," she said, her voice softer now, but still guarded. "But I appreciate it. I'm not going to lie. It really hurt when you said that. I mean, I know we've had our fights, but that was harsh." "I know," I said quietly, "and I'm really sorry. I was just so angry, and I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt. But that doesn't make it right." There was another pause, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "Look, I get that you're mad about the dress. I get that I crossed a line, and I shouldn't have done what I did. But you've got to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I really thought I was doing something good." Her words stung, not because they weren't true, but because they reminded me of how fundamentally different we were. In her mind, she had been trying to help, trying to inject her own beliefs and values into my wedding. But she hadn't considered what that meant for me. She hadn't respected my boundaries. And that was the root of the problem. "I know you weren't trying to hurt me," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But that's the point, Jenny. You didn't think about how I would feel. You didn't ask me. You just did what you thought was best, without considering what I wanted. That's why I was so hurt. It wasn't just about the dress, it was about you not respecting my choices." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I wondered if she was processing what I had said, if she was finally starting to understand. "I guess I never really thought about it like that," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I thought I was helping. But I can see how it would feel like I was taking over." "That's exactly how it felt," I said, my voice softening. "And I know we've had our differences. But this is my wedding, Jenny. It's supposed to be about what makes me happy. And I felt like you took that away from me when you did what you did." For a moment, there was silence again, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I had finally said everything I needed to say, without anger or accusations. It was the truth, and I had spoken it calmly and honestly. "I'm sorry too," Jenny finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just, I don't know, caught up in my own ideas. But I get it now. I get why you were so upset." It wasn't the full apology I had hoped for, but it was something, and more importantly, it felt like the beginning of something, a shift, perhaps, in the way we could move forward. I wasn't naive enough to believe that everything would be fixed with one conversation. But this was a start. "Thank you," I said softly. "I appreciate that." The conversation fizzled out after that, and we exchanged a few awkward pleasantries before hanging up. But as I put the phone down, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had taken the first step. I had taken responsibility for my own actions. And in doing so, I had started to release some of the anger that had been weighing me down for weeks. It wasn't an instant fix. The hurt over the dress was still there, and I knew that our relationship would take time to mend, if it ever fully did. But apologizing had given me a sense of closure, a sense that I was no longer holding on to something toxic inside me. In the days that followed, I focused more on my wedding preparations, but this time with a clearer mind. I had a new dress, a new sense of perspective, and a feeling that, no matter what happened with Jenny, I was finally taking control of my own happiness. The wedding was about me, about my fiancé, and about the life we were building together. And while the dress disaster had been a painful chapter, it didn't have to define the entire story. As I moved forward, I realized that apologizing to Jenny wasn't about letting her off the hook or excusing what she had done. It was about taking control of my own actions, my own integrity, and choosing the kind of person I wanted to be. And that, more than anything, felt like the right step toward healing. After the conversation with Jenny, I felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. While the apology was necessary, it didn't magically erase the tension that had been building between us for years. It was a step forward, but it was clear to me that the real work, both in our relationship and within myself, was just beginning. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on more than just the dress or the argument. The whole situation had forced me to look at the way I had handled conflict in my life. Particularly with Jenny, I had spent so many years avoiding direct confrontation with her, afraid that standing up for myself would only escalate the tension between us. But in doing so, I had allowed resentment to build, to the point where it exploded in ways I couldn't control. And while Jenny had been wrong to impose her beliefs on me, I couldn't ignore my own role in how things had spiraled out of control. I had let years of unresolved frustration shape the way I reacted to her. And when the moment came, I had chosen to hurt her in the same way I felt she had hurt me. That wasn't the person I wanted to be. And it wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted to have, whether with my sister or anyone else. Taking responsibility for my own actions was difficult. It meant acknowledging that while Jenny's behavior had crossed a line, I wasn't innocent in how things had played out. It also meant realizing that setting boundaries wasn't just about telling other people where the line was. It was about knowing when I needed to step back and take control of my emotions before they controlled me. As much as I wanted to blame everything on Jenny, the truth was that I had allowed her to get under my skin for years. I had let her opinions and judgments shape the way I saw myself, constantly feeling like I wasn't enough or that I had to bend to her will to keep the peace. But peace, I realized, wasn't something you could create by giving up pieces of yourself. It had to come from within, from knowing who you were and standing firm in that knowledge. That realization hit me hard. For years, I had been so focused on maintaining harmony in my relationships that I had lost sight of my own needs. I had played the role of the easygoing sister, the one who didn't push back, the one who let things slide. But that had come at a cost, my sense of self-worth, my ability to speak up for what I wanted, and my confidence in standing up for myself without feeling like I was being selfish. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Jenny. It was about the way I had handled conflict in all areas of my life. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who avoided drama at all costs, even if it meant swallowing my own feelings. And while that had kept things relatively calm on the surface, it had also left me with a lot of unresolved emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. Emotions that eventually exploded in moments like the one with Jenny. Now, I had to ask myself, how could I change that pattern? How could I take responsibility for my own emotional well-being without letting other people dictate how I felt or how I reacted? It was a question that had no easy answers. But I knew that it started with setting real boundaries, both with others and with myself. Setting boundaries with Jenny had always seemed impossible. She was the type of person who pushed and pushed until she got her way. And I had always been the type to back down, thinking it was easier to give in than to fight. But I realized now that giving in had only made things worse. By not standing my ground, I had taught her that it was okay to disregard my feelings, to take over situations that weren't hers to control. That had to change. But I also knew that setting boundaries wasn't just about telling Jenny what she couldn't do. It was about me learning to communicate more clearly, to speak up before things escalated to the point of no return. I had to learn how to assert myself without feeling guilty, without feeling like I was causing trouble just by asking for what I needed. That was the real challenge, learning to value my own voice as much as I valued keeping the peace. It wasn't going to be easy. Years of playing the role of the good sister had conditioned me to avoid conflict at all costs. And changing that mindset wasn't something I could do overnight. But I knew that if I didn't start now, the cycle would continue. I'd keep letting Jenny, and others, walk all over me. And eventually, I'd reach a breaking point again. And next time, I might not be able to repair the damage. I started by making a list of the boundaries I needed to set, not just with Jenny, but with everyone in my life. I wrote down the things that mattered to me, the things I wasn't willing to compromise on anymore. I reminded myself that it was okay to say no, that it was okay to protect my own space and my own happiness, even if it meant disappointing someone else. One of the first things on that list was my wedding. It was my day, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even Jenny, dictate how it should go. I had already made peace with the fact that the original dress was ruined, but I wasn't going to let that ruin the rest of my wedding. I had a new dress, and while it wasn't the one I had originally dreamed of, it was still beautiful, and it was still mine. I also made a promise to myself that I would enjoy my wedding day. No matter what, there would be no more drama. No more letting other people's opinions or actions cloud my happiness. This day was about me and my fiancé. About the life we were building together. And I wasn't going to let anything take that away from me. The next step was having a real conversation with Jenny, not just about the dress, but about the boundaries I needed to set moving forward. I wasn't sure how she would take it, but I knew that this conversation was necessary if we were ever going to repair our relationship. A few days after our initial phone call, I reached out to her again and asked if we could meet in person. She agreed, though I could sense some hesitation in her voice. We decided to meet at a cafe downtown, a neutral space where we could talk without the pressure of being at either of our homes. As I sat across from her at the cafe, I could feel the tension between us, like an invisible barrier that neither of us wanted to cross. But this time, I wasn't going to let that tension control the conversation. I had come prepared, ready to speak my truth, even if it was uncomfortable. Jenny, I began, my voice steady but firm. I'm glad we could meet. I know we've already talked about what happened, but there's more I need to say. Not just about the dress, but about our relationship. She looked at me warily, as if bracing herself for another fight. Okay, she said, her tone cautious. Go ahead. I've been thinking a lot about how we interact. How we've interacted for years. I said, and I've realized that I haven't always been good at setting boundaries with you. I've let things slide because I didn't want to cause conflict. But that hasn't worked. It's just led to more resentment. And that's not fair to either of us. Jenny shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. What are you saying? I'm saying that I need to be clearer with you about what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not. That doesn't mean I don't love you or that I don't value our relationship. But I need to protect my own space too. When you dyed my dress, it wasn't just about the dress, it was about you not respecting my choices. And that's a pattern I've seen for a long time. She looked down at her coffee, avoiding my gaze. I didn't realize it was that bad. I know you didn't, I said, softening my tone. But it's not just about this one thing. It's about years of feeling like my voice doesn't matter as much as yours. And that's not okay. If we're going to move forward, I need you to understand that I'm going to start setting boundaries. And I need you to respect them. Jenny stayed quiet for a few moments, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she looked up at me. I don't want you to feel like I don't respect you. Sometimes I get caught up in my own ideas. And I don't always think about how it affects other people. I know, I said, but that's why boundaries are important. So we don't end up here again. She nodded slowly. Okay, I get it. I'll try to do better. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a start. And that's all I could ask for. As we left the cafe, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The conversation had been hard, but it had been necessary. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally stood up for myself. Like I had taken control of a relationship that had long been out of balance. Jenny and I still had a lot of work to do. But this was the first step. And more importantly, it was the first step I had taken in reclaiming my own voice, my own space, and my own happiness. It was a moment of clarity. One that reminded me that taking responsibility didn't mean accepting blame for everything. It meant recognizing where I had fallen short, setting boundaries where they were needed, and learning to speak up for myself in ways that honored both my relationships and my own well-being. And as I walked away from that conversation, I knew that no matter what happened next, I had finally started to take responsibility for my own life, and that was the most important step of all. As I left the cafe after my conversation with Jenny, I felt an unexpected mix of relief and uncertainty. I had done what I needed to do. I had set boundaries, asserted myself, and let her know that things couldn't go on the way they had. But while the conversation had been productive, it wasn't the neat resolution I had been hoping for. There wasn't some magical moment where everything suddenly felt okay between us. And maybe that was the most important lesson I had learned. Sometimes peace doesn't come with resolution. Sometimes peace comes from accepting that things might never be fully resolved, and that's okay. The rest of the day passed quietly, and I found myself reflecting on the entire journey that had led to this point. My wedding was just a few weeks away, and what should have been a time filled with excitement had been clouded by family tension and personal turmoil. But now, with that tension partially eased, I realized that I had been holding onto a vision of what I thought my life, and my relationships, should look like. The truth, however, was messier. Not everything could be fixed. Not every conflict could be tied up with a perfect bow. And that's what I was starting to come to terms with. I wasn't going to get the ideal, harmonious relationship with my sister that I had secretly longed for. I wasn't going to get the magical wedding dress I had envisioned for years. And maybe, the life I had always pictured for myself, one where everything worked out just the way I wanted it to, wasn't realistic either. But that didn't mean I couldn't move forward. It was in that realization that I found a new sense of peace. I didn't need everything to be perfect. I didn't need Jenny to fully understand the depth of how she had hurt me. And I didn't need an apology that would suddenly erase all the years of tension between us. What I needed was to let go of the idea that resolution was the only path to healing. I could heal without everything being fixed. In the days that followed, I focused more on myself and my upcoming wedding. There were still details to finalize. And as I dived back into the planning process, I noticed that my heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The dress, which had once been the focal point of all my stress and anger, was no longer at the forefront of my mind. I had a new dress, one that was beautiful, even if it wasn't the original, and I was finally able to see it for what it was. Just a dress. It wasn't the symbol of my entire wedding. It wasn't the thing that would make or break the day. What mattered most was the love I shared with my fiancé and the life we were about to build together. As I started to shift my focus, I realized that letting go of the hurt didn't mean letting Jenny off the hook for what she had done. It didn't mean pretending that everything was fine or that I had completely forgiven her. What it meant was that I was no longer allowing her actions to dictate my happiness. I had set my boundaries, and I had expressed my feelings. Now it was up to her to respect those boundaries. Whether she did or not wasn't something I could control, and that was a freeing realization. There's a certain power in accepting that you can't control other people's behavior. For so long, I had felt trapped in this cycle of resentment and anger because I had been waiting for Jenny to change. For her to realize the error of her ways and apologize in a way that felt genuine to me. But now, I understood that waiting for that moment was only holding me back. I didn't need her to change for me to move forward. I could move forward regardless of what she did, or didn't do. One evening, about a week after my conversation with Jenny, I was sitting at home with my fiancé, going over some final wedding details. We were picking out the songs for our reception, laughing as we reminisced about our favorite music and how we had bonded over our shared love of certain bands early in our relationship. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of joy that I had almost forgotten in the midst of all the chaos. This was what mattered. This was why I was getting married. It wasn't about the dress or the guest list or even the decor. It was about us, about the life we were building together. As I sat there, watching my fiancé scroll through song options on his phone, I realized that I had spent so much time worrying about things that, in the grand scheme of life, didn't matter nearly as much as I thought they did. The drama with Jenny, while painful, didn't have to define this period of my life. My wedding wasn't about her, it was about me, my partner, and the love we shared. And that love was stronger than any dress or family conflict. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how much I had grown in the past few weeks. It hadn't been easy, and there were still moments where the hurt from the dress incident bubbled up. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. I was learning to let go, not just of the anger, but of the need for things to be perfect. Perfection, I realized, was an illusion. Life wasn't perfect. Relationships weren't perfect. And my wedding wouldn't be perfect either. But it didn't have to be. The next morning, I woke up feeling more at peace than I had in a long time. There was still work to be done, both in terms of the wedding and my relationship with Jenny, but I had finally come to a place where I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't consumed by the anger anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had accepted that things would be messy. And that was okay. I decided to send Jenny a text that day, just to check in. It wasn't a grand gesture. And it wasn't an attempt to resolve everything. It was just a small step, a way of letting her know that I was still here. Still open to moving forward. Even if we didn't have all the answers yet. Hey, I wrote. I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. I just want you to know that I'm still processing everything. But I'm glad we talked. Let's keep working on this. Okay? I didn't expect a long response. And I wasn't even sure if she would reply right away. But a few hours later, my phone buzzed with a short but meaningful message. Thanks for reaching out. I know I've got work to do too. Let's keep talking. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. But it was something. And that was enough. Over the next few weeks, as the wedding drew closer, I continued to focus on myself and the things that brought me joy. I spent time with friends, planned a few low-key outings with my fiancé, and immersed myself in the excitement of the big day. I realized that I had been so caught up in the drama that I had forgotten to enjoy the process. But now, with the weight of the conflict lifting, I was able to finally feel the joy and anticipation I had been missing. The night before my wedding, I sat quietly by myself, reflecting on everything that had happened. The dress, the fight with Jenny, the boundaries I had set, it had all been part of a larger journey. A journey toward understanding myself, toward reclaiming my own voice, and toward realizing that I didn't need things to be perfect in order to be happy. As I prepared for the biggest day of my life, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from everything being resolved. It was the kind of peace that comes from accepting that things don't need to be resolved for you to move forward. Life was messy, and so were relationships. But I was ready. Ready for the mess. Ready for the love. And ready for whatever came next. And as I lay down that night, knowing that in less than 24 hours I would be walking down the aisle, I smiled to myself. I had found my peace, not in resolution, but in the acceptance that some things can never be fully resolved. And that's okay. The morning of my wedding dawned with a soft golden light filtering through the curtains. There was a calm in the air, the kind of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up not thinking about the argument with Jenny or the dress. I woke up thinking about my future, about the life I was about to begin with the person I loved most. It was a surreal feeling. For so long, I had been caught up in the stress and the chaos, the family drama and the disappointment. But now, here I was, on the brink of my wedding day, and I felt at peace. I had been working toward this moment for so long, planning every detail, navigating the conflicts, and confronting my own emotions. And now, finally, the day had come, and I was ready. I took a deep breath and allowed myself a moment to reflect on everything that had brought me to this point. It hadn't been an easy journey. In fact, it had been far more challenging than I ever could have imagined. But that challenge had shaped me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had forced me to confront parts of myself I had been avoiding for years. My tendency to prioritize others' needs over my own. My reluctance to set boundaries. And my fear of standing up for myself when it mattered most. But now, as I stood on the cusp of this new chapter in my life, I realized that the hardest part of this journey hadn't been about the dress or even the conflict with Jenny. It had been about choosing myself. It had been about recognizing that I was worthy of respect, of love, and of happiness, even if that meant disappointing others along the way. For years, I had been playing the role of the peacemaker. I had been the one to step back, to smooth over the rough edges, to keep the peace at the expense of my own needs. But in doing so, I had lost sight of myself. I had let my own voice get drowned out by the louder opinions and demands of others. And it had taken something as significant as my wedding to make me realize that I couldn't keep living that way. This journey had taught me something I hadn't known I needed to learn, that I had to choose myself. Not just once, but over and over again. I had to choose myself when others expected me to bend to their will. I had to choose myself when it felt easier to stay silent than to speak up. And most importantly, I had to choose myself even when it meant risking conflict or disappointing the people I cared about. Choosing myself hadn't been easy. It had meant confronting Jenny in a way I had never done before. It had meant accepting that some relationships, no matter how close, couldn't be fixed with a simple apology or a quick conversation. It had meant learning to set boundaries and, more importantly, learning to enforce them. But as difficult as it had been, I knew now that it was the right thing to do. I had to put myself first. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that honored my own worth and happiness. And in choosing myself, I had found a strength I didn't know I had. I glanced at the clock and realized that it was time to start getting ready. My mom was already downstairs, overseeing the final preparations, and my bridesmaids would be arriving soon. I took one last look around the room, my old bedroom in my parents' house. The place where I had grown up, where so many memories had been made. And now, here I was, about to leave this room for the last time as an unmarried woman. It was a bittersweet feeling. But mostly, it was exciting. I was ready for this next chapter. As I got ready, my bridesmaids arrived one by one, filling the room with laughter and excitement. The energy was infectious, and I found myself smiling and laughing with them. All the tension from the past few weeks melting away. My new dress hung on the back of the door, waiting for me, and as I looked at it, I felt a sense of pride. It wasn't the dress I had originally planned on wearing, but it was beautiful, and more importantly, it was a symbol of how far I had come. When the time came to put on the dress, I stood in front of the mirror, my heart pounding with anticipation. As my bridesmaids helped me into it, I looked at my reflection, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the version of myself I had been trying to find throughout this entire process. The woman in the mirror wasn't just a bride, she was someone who had fought for herself, who had chosen herself, and who was now standing tall in the face of everything that had tried to pull her down. I was proud of the person I had become. Once I was dressed and ready, I took a deep breath and headed downstairs, where my family was waiting. My mom's eyes welled up with tears as soon as she saw me, and I could see the pride on her face. "You look beautiful, sweetie," she whispered as she pulled me into a tight hug. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. For everything. I hadn't seen Jenny yet, and part of me wondered how she would react when she saw me in the new dress. We hadn't had much contact since our conversation at the cafe, and while things between us were still fragile, I knew that I had done what I needed to do. I had apologized for my part. I had set my boundaries, and now it was up to her to respect them. As I walked into the room where my dad was waiting to escort me down the aisle, I spotted Jenny standing off to the side. Our eyes met, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between us. She gave me a small, tentative smile, and I returned it, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. We weren't fully healed, and we might never be. But that was okay. I had done what I could. And now it was time to focus on the moment. My dad took my arm, and as the music began to play, we started our walk down the aisle. The ceremony felt like a dream, everything flowing together in a way that made the stress of the past weeks feel distant and unimportant. As I reached the altar and saw my fiancé standing there, his eyes filled with love and admiration, I knew that this was what it had all been about. The vows we exchanged were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we had been through together. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for him, but for the journey that had brought me to this point. The challenges, the conflicts, and even the hurt had shaped me into the person I was standing there, ready to begin this next chapter of my life. When the ceremony ended and we made our way to the reception, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. The weight of the past few weeks had lifted, and all that was left was the joy of the moment, surrounded by the people I loved. The laughter, the dancing, The speeches, it all blended together into a perfect celebration of love and life. At one point during the reception, Jenny came up to me. We stood there for a moment, awkwardly, not sure what to say. Finally, she spoke. "I'm glad you're happy," she said softly. "You look amazing." "Thanks, Jenny," I replied, my voice gentle. "I appreciate that." We didn't need to say more. We both knew that our relationship was still a work in progress. But we were both trying. And that was enough. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, the ups, the downs, the moments of doubt and the moments of triumph. In the end, I had chosen myself, and that choice had led me to a place of peace, even if it hadn't been the resolution I had originally hoped for. And as I danced with my new husband, surrounded by friends and family, I realized that this was the beginning of something even more important. Not just the beginning of my marriage, but the beginning of a life where I would continue to choose myself, every single day. Because at the end of the day, that was the most important thing I had learned. I was enough. And I always would be.